Hello music makers, welcome back. Last week I put an arrangement together for my Stutter House track, but at the end of that I'd kind of lost my ears on it and it was still missing something. Instead of rushing the end of the video and cutting to the finished version, I thought it would be much more valuable to you lot if I showed you what it took to finish this track off. I came back on a different day with fresh ears and a fresh perspective, and it was instantly apparent what the track was needing. Not a lot, as it turns out, but a few small changes added up to a big difference. Let me show you. So, just before I talk you through everything I did, let me tell you what I heard when I came back with a fresh perspective, what I was trying to achieve. There were only two main issues I had with it, really. First, tonally, it was lacking a lot of presence. I know it's supposed to be a chill track, but overall it felt too dull, and in general the balance was just off. That was really apparent when I checked the track in mono. Secondly, it was just lacking what I would call details. Little touches here and there that keep the track flowing and keep the track interesting. That's it in a nutshell. Let's discuss details first. Now, in terms of the overall arrangement I decided on last week, that hasn't changed. All the breaks, drops, intro, etc., that's all exactly where it was and it's all the same length. I was happy with what I would call the macro arrangement. Within those sections, however, I have made some micro arrangement changes. Let's compare the intro. Okay, here is the original. Here is the new one. As you can hear, there's now a reverse into the start, reverse reverb on the vocal, and a fade on the pad. If you want to know how that effect is achieved, check out the last video I did giving away free Ableton racks. It's called the Rev, or reverse reverb. Also, I have changed the arrangement of the vocals. I've moved Dreaming to the start of the bar, and now I'm answering that with the post-chorus hook, the Don't Wake Me Up line. So now we have a question and answer between Dreaming and Don't Wake Me Up. So now we are teasing the listener with two hooks, which will come later. Now the break comes in, but this time it's filtered. I'll go over the tonal differences in the mix section later. Now I have the post-chorus hook in there. That let me get the Don't Wake vocal. That enhances the ramping stutter effect as our fill into the first drop. Also, there is a new addition, this white noise whoosh sound. That's also letting me emphasize the stutter fill. Just sweeping up and down there. That really lets me articulate the gate rhythm. So between those arrangement tweaks and the tonal difference, that really helps us drop a lot better. Check out the difference. Here's where we used to be. It just doesn't launch the track as well. It's a bit anticlimactic. Okay, so the first drop is mostly the same, arrangement-wise at least. I've just added the atmospheric dreaming vocals halfway through. Again, just little touches of interest. Details. Onto the first verse, and again, mostly the same, except halfway through it, there is now a new instrument. Now the break comes in, but this time it's filtered. I'll go over the tonal differences in the mix section later.
So many times I've heard promises of romance. Can't explain what I'm sensing. Every part of me trembling as I feel that you got through my defense.
There's now a piano, little interplay between the vocal and the piano, just extra interest. Just in the vocal gaps, so that there's a little elevation halfway through, helping with that feeling of progression. For the first break, again, mostly the same, except this time I've added those atmospheric dreaming vocals as an echo to whenever she sings dreaming in the main line. I've added the piano halfway through, just to help lift the pad a little, playing the same chords, help it build more. And now the drum break is filtered. And again, using the white noise to help accentuate the stutter fill. For this middle drop here, almost identical again, except for a tiny addition of the atmospheric dreaming vocal at 2 points. Placed in between those "Don't Wake Me Up" vocals, which I then transferred to the intro. Now, it's worth noting, if these vocals were a little bit more discernible, I might not have used them so often, but because they're so washed out and in the background, I'm not counting them as a vocal. I'm hearing them more like another one of the synth instruments, like a stab. So I don't think it's too much to sprinkle these around quite often. As for the main break, there's a few substantial changes, namely the piano at the beginning. Same line that was in the verse. It's very pretty, helps bring the energy down nicely, but keeps more interest than just a pad. Now, for the vocal this time, I've gone back to the main dreaming hook. In the previous video, I tried to use the chorus of the second vocal, which is this.
And I should know by now to always touch the ground.
I always said it sounded more like a middle eighth than a chorus, but the mood just wasn't matching and it's just not as good. So instead, I put our main chorus there. And why not? Why not just make it a rule that when the track breaks down, that's our chorus? It's the mood we set for that line and it's how we build. So the main chorus is back in there, but to differentiate it, every time she sings Dreaming this time, I turn on the stutter gate. A nice little reminder of the main theme of the genre. Only other main changes are the lead. That is now coming in early, filtering up so you know what's coming and helping us build and drop. And lastly, the extended Don't Wake is our stutter fill again into the last drop. And before we do the last drop itself, you can hear how much better we drop now into the last drop from that break. Here's how we used to sound. And here's how it drops now. much better. Now, for the last drop. The first main change is the bass. I'd almost forgot I'd made this more melodic bass originally in the feedback video, not just the functional line. So I swapped to that one for the last drop. As you can see here, a lot more passing notes in between holding the root notes. Just getting fancy with it, adding to the energy, another sign of progression. Of course, those little atmospheric dreaming vocals make a return. The post-chorus hook is in, and it's even squeezed in there with the main chorus vocal. Basically, I've thrown everything at the last drop. I kept those louder hi-hats and the extra shaker that was added on the last video. That still works. As you heard at the end there, I faded out, and that's to do with digital distribution rules these days. So here's a funny story. A few of you have asked me if I ever get rejections because I don't master my mixes and I just let them clip. And the answer is no. I've never had a rejection based on the sound of something. What we have been rejected for in the past is the length of endings. What they don't like is if your track is added to a playlist and it has a big reverb tail at the end, that's terrible for the next track coming in because it will take much longer. So they don't like that. They'd rather you fade it, and fade it rather quickly for the same reasons. And while we're on the subject of distribution, let me show you the way we do it. For every track, we try to make 3 edits. You can see at the top here, I have spot, short, and extended. So this one is the Spotify or the general streaming mix. Some would have called this a radio mix, but I don't think radio is relevant anymore. Anyway, that is the main aim. That was why I chose quite a commercial vocal. I know some of you criticized that in the last video, but this was always supposed to be a streaming track. It's not a club track. So that's the main format. That's the one I started with. And then from that, I will make a 2-minute-ish short instrumental. That's the one we put out first, for all kinds of reasons. First of all, legal. My original work as a backing track goes out and is therefore copyrighted by its existence. Then if anything happens with the vocal, or if anyone else wants to top line it and there's any trouble, we can always refer back to the original instrumental. It's also a good format for TikTok and Reels. And lastly, an extended mix. I'm not sure where this belongs in terms of a DJ set, but just in case a DJ wants to play it, I'll add some drums at the beginning and end, and maybe some instrumentation so they can mix it in to a DJ set. Okay, looking at sound things now. As I said, I identified a lack of presence. It felt dull or subdued. And in fact, if you just play around with an EQ on the master channel of that original version, you can soon identify where the issue is. It turns out pretty much every element of the track benefits from a little more going on in this range. Everything apart from the vocal, in fact. And that makes sense if you think about how this track came about. The first arrangement of this track was the 10-minute mix, which was to be the background track of my feedback video. Now that's important because in the past I have learned a very big lesson. On the You Are Not a Producer video, it turns out choosing a genre which is really strong in the high mids, like piano house, is a really bad idea to put behind spoken words. And what appeared to sound clear enough on my lovely setup was an absolute mess on smaller systems, and viewers were complaining they couldn't hear what I was saying. So, when it came to making this background track, I certainly wasn't going to be pushing in this area, was I? Now, while the EQ bump on the master does highlight where our problem is, this is not the solution in itself. Obviously, it's one solution, it's working for some things, but not all. But it does highlight our general area we need to be looking in. The first thing I looked at was the drums. One thing the EQ highlighted for me was how much I actually like that drum break. It really makes the groove for me, and also it helps it stand out from some of its peers. So, both as personal preference and as a mix solution, I decided to make the drum break a more prominent part of the track. The problem is I couldn't really turn it up anymore. It's already quite spiky, as this is an acoustic source, not an electronic one, and it hasn't been heavily processed already. So I did try some compression, but it lost too much of the groove in the context of the other drums, particularly the backbeat. In the end, I settled on some saturation. That let me raise the total level without destroying the dynamics. I went with the BPB saturator, little bit of tape and tube, compensated the output, although I did want it to raise the output somewhat. If you're wondering about this mid-EQ bump, that was already there. If we look at the channel from the previous session last week, you can see everything else is identical. I just added the saturation. This was already here too. I had lo-fied it with the tape from Tone Boosters and the vinyl from Isotope. So I was already in the right area. I had clearly identified that there wasn't enough presence here. But listen to it now. Just this saturator alone lifts the presence of the whole drums. So hopefully you can hear, just saturating the break there helped bring out the presence in the drums. I did also EQ the whole drum bus. I added some mids in that similar kind of area. Now again, this EQ was already here on the plot. Here's how it was set on the plot. So the difference is mainly just this band. A few dB at 1.5K-ish. And a couple of minor tweaks up here. But between that mid-band and saturating the break, that's all the presence I needed on the drums. Okay, on to the pad. The pad is really important because that's the main mid instrument. Of all the elements here, it's the most responsible for that presence range, especially when the vocal isn't there. So to bring the presence out, I did three things. First of all, for the synth layer part of this pad group, as you'll be able to see here, it's just a simple sawtooth pad in Vital. I just opened the filter a bit more. That's all. It was a little lower. So I just opened that up so that when this group filter for all the layers opens up, there will be more high frequencies to come through. Simple as that. And the string layer. It turns out this string layer from the BBC Symphonic, the free orchestra plugin, the cellos in this case, it turns out they naturally have lots of high mids. So all I did was make sure those are turned up nice and loud, especially in the drops. Now this EQ was already there, so again, I must have identified the problem somewhere, just not completely fixed it. The only other thing I changed was the gate floor. If the floor is very low, that makes the stutter effect very abrupt. And when the floor is high, the gated bits that are cut out aren't as quiet, so the effect is lessened. So the previous mix was down here somewhere. Have a listen. And if we raise the floor, it sounds like this. And I settled on about -9, so you can still hear the effect, but the pad isn't being ducked as low. So because the pad now is literally more present, it's there more of the time, it's not being ducked as low, that means the whole track sounds more present. So that's all I needed to do to get the pad working. Okay, on to the vocal. One thing that was apparent on fresh listening was how imbalanced the track was versus the vocal. One of the things I didn't spot last week, probably because I was making the video on headphones, is how wide this vocal is. And that certainly wasn't helping things. A quick mono check makes it obvious. Listen to the original, and then I'll show you in mono. Now listen to how imbalanced this is in mono. considering that's supposed to be our lead element, that is sunk way too far back. So what I've done is used MSED to split this into side and mid. I've ended up dropping the side channel by a whole 8 dB and raised the mid by 2, but that balances things nicely. So that was one element causing an imbalance. Another reason the vocal sounded out of balance was the general amount of ambience, particularly compared to the pad. It felt like the vocal was stuck on top as opposed to sat in the track. So in general, I've turned up the reverb, my ever-favorite Dragonfly here, and I've added a flanged delay, very similar to the one I made in the Racks video. I used delay by 6 sample here, mainly because it has ducking built in, so I don't have to set that up. Here's that flanger on the output of the delay. So in between words, we get a nice flanged echo. All the ambient effects are automated, so the vocal is much wetter in the breaks and drier when the beat is present, like in the verse and the last drop. Also, EQ. You can see here I added a tiny bit of mid frequencies, like the ones we discovered on the master channel earlier. Although it doesn't help the vocal tonally as much, it lets me sync the vocal by a dB or so back into the track, and the mid bump helps it ride above the pad still. To help wash those atmospheric vocals out, I've gone crazy with delays. There's a fully turned up delay here, and Ableton's tape delay. One just wasn't enough, apparently. And of course, I've cranked Dragonfly almost all the way up there, so there's more ambience here than there is dry signal. And to separate it from the main vocal, and again to sync it into the background, I used M-Auto Pitch, the free auto-tune, not for its tuning, but for its formant shifting. So it's shifted down in formants. That gives it the sound of something that's been pitched down, even though it hasn't actually changed pitch. That slowdown effect. Now, with the presence fixed in most elements, there's a few parts in that last drop fighting for space with the vocal. So I've employed a couple of dynamic solutions there. The first thing is I've set up an envelope follower on the vocal, which is linked to this EQ, which was already on my pad group. It's going to duck the midband on it. So you'll see this midband jumping around as the vocal sings. So only 2 or 3 dB, that's all that's needed. Remember, 6 dB is twice the volume. And then lastly, an even more surgical approach, the lead on the last drop. For the last half, when the vocal comes in, I take the lead out of the gate. It helps the drop pick up halfway through, because we do go round twice, but it does leave me with 2 lead instruments in the same range now. So I've turned it down, obviously, but what I've also done is added a plugin called Flora Lite by Ewan Bristow, another great free plugin. It's basically a free version of Track Spacer, if you know that plugin. It's a spectral sidechainer. So instead of ducking the whole signal, it only ducks the relevant frequencies. As you can hear, it's not affecting the main signal that much. It's only ducking what it needs to. And between those two things, that manages the last drop nicely. It's still busy, but that's on purpose. But you can still hear the vocals without them being sat right on top. Now, what makes this extra interesting to me, and why I've been asking what you guys think so much, is comments like this. Alpha8902 left a comment asking me to show the mix process because they thought this sounded excellent. Well, their specific words were, "It sounds very hi-fi." And that comment was on the original version for the feedback video. So impressed as Alpha was, and indeed thank you for the compliment, as you can see, I didn't agree. Which I think highlights how the discerning ear may grow over time. It's a bit like how we all thought Vengeance sound packs sounded really professional back in the day. But if you listen to them now, not so much. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, because this is all it took for me to determine that this track is now finished. Do you agree? Or like Alpha, do you already think it sounded great, and maybe you can't hear much of a difference? Or the opposite, would you have gone much further with this in order for it to feel finished for you? Get typing. And while you're down there pressing buttons on that keyboard, press another button for me, will you? Like, subscribe, or share the video. Or if you really appreciated what you just watched, there's a link in the description to buy me a coffee. Thank you. And until next time, I will see you in the comments. Bye-bye.